build their confidence that they can solve problems. Curiosity can be learned, taught, and measured.
I've never heard that. That is a great little nugget.
And now how do we have language around that so we can better relate to one another?
This is so fantastic. Hey everyone, this is your coach, Dr. Cynthia, and welcome to another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I am so excited about today's guest. We have Dr. Debra Clary. Let me tell you about Debra. Debra is a leadership strategist, speaker, and author of an upcoming book. We're going to talk a lot about the Curiosity Curve that's coming out in October. With more than 3 decades of executive experience at some of the world's most iconic brands, including Frito-Lay, Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, and Humana. Talk about diversity of background and experience. She helps leaders and organizations accelerate growth by harnessing the transformative power of curiosity. She's also a TEDx talk speaker with thousands of views worldwide, has delivered more than 200 keynotes. And one of my favorite things about Debra, I don't know if this is a little known secret, but she also wrote and performed in her one-woman show, A Curious Woman, off Broadway. And in her early career, she was a stand-up comedian. So we'll see if we have time to get into all the diversity that is Dr. Debra. Welcome. We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for that warm introduction.
Absolutely. We're going to have some fun. I'm curious about the Curiosity Curve. It was one of the things that when I was researching individuals that I thought the person listening would be so excited to hear from, I thought the Curiosity Curve. Now that's intriguing. That's provocative. I know it comes out in October. Tell me a little bit about what inspired this idea of curiosity as a leadership skill and attribute.
Yeah, so it all started with a question, and this question changed my life. I was sitting next to my CEO, and this is a CEO of a $100 billion brand, and somebody was presenting in this meeting, and he turned to me and quietly asked, "Do you think curiosity can be learned, or is it innate?" And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm curious. And so the next week, it just happened to be the 4th of July holiday. I was going away for a week, and that whole holiday, I just couldn't get enough literature and research on this question. I was just so intrigued by this. And so I returned the following Monday, and I'm sitting next to him again, and I say, "Oh, by the way, curiosity can be learned." He goes, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And that was into the conversation. And I'm like, okay, I learned something, he's learned something, but it was just one of those things that to me it just hung with me in the sense of, what is the power of curiosity? It can be learned. It can be learned. It can be measured. And so just serendipitously, the woman at Humana that ran the entire service operations, she called me that afternoon and just said, "Hey, we're doing a all hands meeting in Houston. Would you come and be our keynote?" I go, "Sure. What do you want me to talk about?" She goes, "You can talk about anything." And I go, "Anything?" And she says, "Well, within reason, Deb." And I said, right. I want to talk about curiosity. And she said, "That's fantastic." And so I was able to take everything that I had learned on my holiday and put it into a narrative and to share with the service organization, 3,000 people, the power of asking questions to understand the needs of the customers that they were talking to. And it just took off. People really resonated with it. And so I ended up speaking to more than 10,000 people at Humana over the next couple of years. And again, my boss would say, "Wait, what are you doing in Utah?" And I go, "Remember that question on curiosity?" And this was not my job, but it was something that I felt so passionate about. So I was fitting it in off the side of my desk, so to speak. And that's really how it started. And I did that for a couple of years internally. And the more I did it, the more I realized there wasn't enough data for my liking.
Sure, right.
I come from a research background, and I'm like, wow, if we're really going to make an impact in organizations, large scale change, I want more data. And so I commissioned a group of researchers to do primary research on the question of, is there a relatedness between leadership performance and curiosity? And again, I'm doing this all on my own. Like I'm just
this side hustle, right?
I just need to know the answer to this question. And when the data came back that there was a direct correlation, that's when I said, this is my calling. This is what I need to put out in the world, that real change can happen if we create cultures of curiosity.
On so many levels, right? I mean, that's a big provocative thought, is that when we think about curiosity around the world in business, in our social settings, how much more understanding are we creating when we're curious rather than, set in judgment or not asking deeper questions, which I know you get into in your book. As you began to do the research, and by the way, as a fellow research person, I love data and evidence. I'm a bit of a data geek. So anything for me that starts with a big question and then is backed in evidence is brilliant. What were the surprises that you might have found along the way?
So in the data, we had a population set that had both genders, and in addition, it had people from various organizations at various levels and various tenure. And what surprised me was people with more tenure, and so that correlates with people that are probably in their 50s and 60s, are actually more curious than their counterparts that might be newer in their careers.
Yep. Interesting. Do you have a hypothesis about that?
I do. I think it's because the older we get in general, we have more experience and we have more confidence in ourselves and in our role. So there's some safety there, and we built competencies. And so I think it gives us a platform to be able to challenge the status quo. Again, that's my hypothesis around that.
Yeah, that makes sense. As you have just more lived experience, you can conceptualize that this thing, you can liken it to something else in your experience and sort of draw some relationships and ask questions that might be, you don't know the questions to ask perhaps earlier in career. The other thing that I'm curious about, and I know that this was generalizable, the whole, the evidence that you collected, but what did you learn, if anything, as it relates to how men and women show up from the curiosity curve?
Yes. So in the data, and this was a surprise to me, probably because of my own bias, but there is no difference between men and women curiosity levels.
Okay.
Right? So they're equally curious. However, there are other research that supports that even though the women are curious, they ask less questions in meetings because we've been conditioned to do so since grade school. And so we're less likely to come up with questions in meetings, and we're less likely to speak up and have our voice heard.
Interesting. Yeah, that supports the data from our first book, Now Near Next, which that so often not only are we conditioned to sort of be quiet, be humble, but you reference elementary school or school age, and I often think about, and it's generalized, but there's data to support it, that little girls are conditioned. We raise our hand, we're quiet, we sit still in our chairs, we look for the gold stars, we keep our head down. Little boys are traditionally rambunctious, they're speaking out of turn, all of the things. We then enter corporate America or corporate UK or corporate Singapore, and as women, we sort of conditioned to continue to do that, sort of wait our turn, make certain that we really know the answer before speaking up. And young men have channeled that energy a little differently, but still have that sort of fearlessness about speaking up. In addition to perhaps how people are raised or how they've been formed, what are some of the other curiosity killers, things that hold people back from asking great questions?
Yes. So you just think about, so much that we learn in childhood, and you just mentioned the one in terms of when we go to elementary school. I mean, and it's true for boys and girls, and we talked about the differences with girls, but even with, just in general, we kill curiosity in school when we ask kids to sit in their seats, raise your hand, talk when you're asked to be talked to, but that there's a lot of reasons you want that, because there could be mayhem in a classroom, but sometimes I think we have just indexed way too far on that in terms of really creating curiosity in the classroom. Then you think about just things like, for those that are raised in the Christian religion like I was, is that one of the first stories you learn about is Adam and Eve. And Eve was curious. She ate of the tree of knowledge, and then, mayhem happened in the world, right?
Right.
So you begin to get these seeds of why you wouldn't want to do that. Second thing about the Pandora, don't open Pandora's box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the other is like curiosity killed the cat.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh. Right.
Yes. And when I wrote that in my book, and my editor came back and said, I need you to cite that. And I go, cite that? Like my mother, Miss Slosh told me that. And she's like, I just need you to cite where that comes from. So I did my research, and it found out that it's actually attributed to William Shakespeare in 1589. But guess what? Curiosity killed the cat is only the first part of the sentence.
Oh, what's the rest?
So curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back.
Oh,
You're not taught that,
interesting.
right? In the sense of, there could be pain in being curious, but the reward is there if you stay with it.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that. That is a great little nugget. Yeah. And just emphasizes your entire point.
Yes. And so, we are impressionable when we are young. And so we carry on in this way. And then we go into the workplace. And so we come into the workplace with degrees, you're a lawyer, an accountant, a medical doctor, whatever it might be. And you have this kind of narrow expertise, and we're rewarded for that expertise. And then you couple that with time constraints, is that we're not rewarded to being curious in organizations the way we're currently set up.
So true. Just thinking back to corporate days, and I actually I don't reference it as curiosity. I reference it as not wanting to know the risk, right? Not wanting to lift up the rock, which is part of being curious and asking questions in human capital investment strategy. Is it slows us down, we think, at least on the front end, right? Asking questions can feel like it's slowing down the process, and it can expose things that can slow down the process, or maybe we didn't really want to know. Yeah. And yet I think you and I would argue that exposing those things on the front end, though it takes a little more time, can help you avoid some pretty severe consequences downstream.
Absolutely. And when I work with leaders, I share with them that leadership is about the long game. Right? When somebody comes to you and asks a question and you give them an answer, you've answered a question. But what you haven't done is you haven't developed that individual to think on their own. You haven't given them confidence that you believe in them, that they can solve it. I'm here for you. And what have you thought about, or how could we do this together? And the reason we just give answers is because, one, we're an expert, and two, we don't have a lot of time. At least we perceive we don't have a lot of time. And so leaders tend to play the short game. And when we do that, we're not developing the talent for the long game.
That's a really important point. And I think just to layer on to that, I've been coaching a gentleman, and he's accelerating very quickly through leadership ranks. He's part of a succession plan. And one of the early things that we had to get past in terms of his own mental model is that he had to know everything and have all the answers to the questions. And what I have been coaching him around is the best leaders ask really great questions. So don't feel that you need to have the answers to everything and tell everybody what they need to know. inquire, ask really good provocative questions, and invite the discussion, because not only will you learn something and add to what you already know, but to your point, you're developing other people by having them express themselves.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you build their confidence that they can solve problems.
Right. Right.
What I say to leaders is that you really have no problems, right? You have people that are going to solve the problems. What you need to do is ask the question that helps them solve the problem.
Right. Right.
Now, I do say there's one exception. Like, if they can't solve the problem, that's your problem now, is you have to think about that talent.
Right. Right. Debra, do you get into leading questions? What is your position on, because what that made me think about is help them solve the problem by asking good questions. Well, there's good questions that are truly seeking knowledge and seeking additional thoughts and wisdom. And then there's the question that's sort of leading the witness, right? Have you thought about doing X, Y, Z? Give me your thoughts on that and how that shows up from the curiosity perspective.
Yeah, so I think about questions in two categories: genuine questions and ingenuous questions. So genuine questions is I approach this with an open mind. Like, I swept my brain of any foregone conclusions, or it's one of, I'm going into this with a totally open mind and an open heart. My intention is to listen and to help. So as you know, I know that you know this as well, is that the new face of leadership is coaching. And so coaching is about questions, and at the root of that is curiosity. And so, genuine leadership is asking those kind of questions where you're really trying to understand and you're trying to advance the individual. An ingenuous question is what you just talked about, is like, wouldn't it, couldn't it, shouldn't it? Why didn't you think of this? Close-ended questions. And, unfortunately, I think we've gotten into a leadership pattern where that becomes the norm, because we are stressed and we're limited on time, at least the perception that we're limited on time.
Absolutely. No, that completely resonates. One of the areas, so I was really struck by, and I have to say, a little conflicted by, this notion of curiosity can be learned. And the background of that is I spend a lot of my time and attention in natural talents, positive psychology, right? The things that sort of the hardwiring, developing natural gifts. But I'm intrigued by the idea that curiosity can be learned, and at a minimum that you can directly advance the way in which you show up in a more curious way. So for the person that it would not have naturally come to them, your boss asked you a question, can curiosity, and you are curious by nature and went and spent the entire holiday weekend, right, researching it and studying it. But in that found there's some ways that if that isn't where you naturally go initially, how can you create more curiosity? How does that show up on a regular basis? What are some of the ways that, for the person listening that says, I love what I'm hearing, I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way, or how to even get my voice out there?
Yes. So curiosity is contagious, right? So if you are around a curious person, that in itself is going to elevate your curiosity. Just like engagement, we call it a local phenomenon, meaning the leader of a team drives engagement by the way in which they lead that team. And the same is true of curiosity. So whether you work with a leader that's curious, or you have colleagues that are curious, or you have a partner that's curious, it will absolutely raise your level of curiosity. So that's why I do this work, is because curiosity can be learned. We can create a culture of leadership. What we found in our data is that depending on the level of a leader's curiosity, that dictates the curious level of their team. So if you have a leader that has high curiosity, your team level is going to instinctively raise. And then, fortunately, the reverse is true. If you have a leader that's incurious, your team will be incurious. They will learn that asking questions, challenging the status quo is not welcome here.
It gets back to that whole psychological safety, doesn't it? Because You're really setting the tone of, if I ask questions as the leader, I'm leading by example. You but can follow with asking, being curious as well.
Yes.
Right.
The best thing a leader can do is when somebody asks them a question. Let's say you're in a meeting, they ask the leader a question, and the leader says, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Right? Where they're showing vulnerability that I don't have all the answers. Let's talk about it as a group and see what we can come up with. Mm-hmm. Or you can say, gosh, we don't have the answers in the room. Let's go outside the room to find out more about what you're asking about. Being vulnerable as a leader and saying, I don't know, is powerful.
So powerful because to your point, it shows vulnerability. It also invites others into the conversation, right? Yeah. As I was reading, I've had the privilege of having an advanced copy, so I've been really enjoying and reading through the book. You also talk about the correlation, or at least the relationship, to job satisfaction, kind of retention, et cetera. I'm sure it piggybacks on what you just said, but this really helps to inspire a culture where people want to stay and thrive. It sounds like, based on what you uncovered.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We found 3 key things that curiosity drives. One is retention. Right? You think about the crisis we're facing today in corporations. Retention is one of those. And then there is the engagement level. Gallup reports that in the history of measuring engagement, there's never been a time in history that engagement has been so low. So the majority of our population in the workplace are disengaged. And then the other one is the job satisfaction. And when we did an analysis of individuals that had high levels of curiosity and the relatedness to those 3 factors, that they were positively correlated. And wow. Of course, the reverse is true.
Right.
And, Gallup just reported that in our current workforce, that the highest disengagement level, but it's actually costing the U.S. economy $7.8 trillion annually for people. They're still showing up for work, but it's called the quiet quitting. That I'm showing up, but I'm just not working as hard because I don't think you care about us. What we also did in our study is we learned that a significant population that's disengaged are the millennials. Millennials are, 29 to 40. And they're highly disengaged. Now, why this matters is, 1, they're the highest percentage of the population in the workforce. But 2, this group are the ones that are being developed in succession management, or they should be, right? This is your pipeline for your future senior executives. And if they're already disengaged, that's a real issue for the next decade.
Mm-hmm. How do you work with, I'm thinking about the person listening and having been this person at least once in my career, that is thinking, gosh, our CEO or my senior leader doesn't really create a culture of curiosity. I feel like they kind of shut down when folks are probing or asking additional questions. How do you start with that? Your work with C-suite executives and how you sort of bring them along. What's the sell, the pitch that gets them to maybe lean in?
You mean at the executive level?
Mm-hmm.
So what I have found is that once you show the data in terms of the relationship between creating a culture of curiosity and what it can actually do for performance, I've never not had a CEO say, "Come, please work with us," right? And so they see that one, intuitively it makes sense, but 2, when you see the data, it says like, this is something that we want. And since curiosity can be learned, taught, and measured, then we can get our arms around that. Now, if someone were to come to me at, frontline or mid-manager and say, gosh, I'm working in a culture or my leader is not curious, what should I do? So first off is, can you lead by example? And also make it safe to ask questions of the leader. And, you start off with, hey, I'm new here, or this is something I don't understand. These are some of the things I've been thinking about. Could you kind of help me with these? And so, you're eliciting their support and helping you understand something. You begin to pace and lead. I do believe a single individual, when they behave in that way, can make incremental changes. Now, let's say they're stonewalled. It might be the opportunity to say, I think I belong on another team.
Right.
Or in another organization.
Yeah, because at the base, if there isn't and I come back to Amy Edmondson's psychological safety, because if you ultimately feel as though there's the eye roll, or you're getting shut down, or it's the sort of kind of nod, but really not listening, like, okay, let her or him get it out of, and then be like, great, and move back on to your to the thing that you were talking about originally. That shuts down the discussion really, really quickly. And if leading by example and modeling that behavior isn't sort of organically making a change, it may be time to do something else. I love the idea that it's contagious, though, and I can see how that's palpable. If you're in a room, even with peer to peer, where peers are asking questions and opening and inviting a conversation and digging in, I would think it makes the other person feel heard, feel invested in, and that feels good. So I want to reciprocate that. So
Yes.
That seems like a great way to start to change culture, is worry about yourself and how you can show up curiously and be the contagious one that brings that to the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you an example of this in reverse. I have 4 grandchildren, and my granddaughter, who was 7 at the time, was asking me a question about something, and she was like, could this be it? And I'm like, no, that's not, I don't think that's right. And she'd come up with something else. No, that's not right. And this went on for a few minutes, and she said, you're not being very curious.
Oh,
and
that's amazing.
And it's one of those things, like when you teach it, it's like, yes. I feel like I have to be elevated to do it. And so as opposed for her just to shutting down and saying, oh, I guess there's no answer to this, she called me out and said,
yes.
I'm very curious about this. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Let's start over.
Good for her. Well, it's funny you use that example. I too have 3 grandchildren. And as I was reading your book, one of the things that struck me initially was little children and when they get into their why stage. Well, why is the sky blue? Well, why is that? Well, they ask the why questions, and we get, at some point about the 5th why, and we're completely out of answers. I'm usually out of answers well before that. We're like, I don't know. Go ask your mother.
Yes.
And so we do sort of condition around, we're so busy, questions require thought. It's so much easier to just move on. It requires us to do some deep thinking if somebody asks a really great, insightful question. It almost strikes me that we're in a day and age where this is more necessary than ever. When you were doing your research with everything with AI and machine learning and all the things that the computers are doing for us, and we look at the world of work study of what jobs and talents and attributes are going to be necessary going forward, how do you think about curiosity in this age where, people are so worried that computers are going to take all of our jobs?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm actually very excited about the relationship between curiosity and AI. I don't think we'll ever replace like the human intuition and the human feeling. And I use AI every day, and for me, I have to start with curiosity. I have to ask a question of that, and then it sparks another question for me, and then I go back to another question. For me, AI continuously elevates my curiosity, and it's just the speed in which I'm learning is just accelerated.
Right. And I think the other thing, and I agree with you 100%. I am excited about humans and bots coexisting and being on teams together. The fact that you have to be curious to have the appropriate prompt in the first place, But the other thing, as I've been studying kind of the future of work, is this notion that it's not always accurate, right? It's decades and decades of data that are being, sort of repurposed, and it's not always going to be the right answer. It's the curious human being with real lived experiences and compassion and empathy and curiosity that can say, there's something about this that feels off, or what if this variable was taken into consideration? To me, that is sort of the level of human capacity that we bring that becomes a superpower above and beyond all the stuff that technology is going to spit out and do. So in some ways, as I was reading through the curiosity curve, it struck me that timeliness of this, as people are sort of grappling with, where do I need to double down my effort in terms of development and growth to compete with what may be automating a lot of our jobs, as curiosity seems to be a really natural place to start.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So what's the one small thing or the one action that the person listening says, I'm intrigued, I love this, I would love to consider myself a more curious person and do this more intentionally. I'm all about intentionality. What are some of the tips or tricks to begin this journey of being more intentionally curious?
Well, I do think it starts with the mindset, which is related to intention. It's this saying to yourself, my intent today is to be more open and curious. My intent today is to connect with people in a different way. So it's like kind of starting with what you say, the intention. The other thing I would recommend is I have a free curiosity assessment on my website. So you can take this assessment. It's a validated instrument. It takes 6 to 7 minutes, and it'll give you your current level of curiosity. And there are 4 factors that make up this assessment. And that's when you can begin to say, all right, here's my starting point. What in ways can I create, improve in these areas? And then say in a month or 2 months, take it again and see if you've actually had a movement. The other thing is that it is to share with others around you. Your intention is to be more curious, and say, to me, that means I'm going to ask more open-ended questions, and I'm going to be intentional about my listening. And after a couple of months, ask them, how do you think I'm doing in terms of moving down the continuum of curiosity? Get a partner that can give you feedback.
Yes. I'm a big proponent of accountability, and anytime I share with a lot of my clients when they're working on something, whether it's, not using as many qualifying words or what have you, find somebody you trust that can give you feedback, that you're open to feedback. They love and care about you, so you're open to it, and give them permission to share with you, like your granddaughter did even, right? If in a one-to-one, in a safe space, to call you on it when you're not being particularly curious. So mindset, set the intention. I love this idea that you have the assessment that individuals can figure out directly, how are you showing up from a level of curiosity, and your .coms, so that we have that. I know it'll be in the show notes as well, but where can folks get a copy of that?
It's my name, DebraClary.com.
All right, easy enough.
It'll pop up. And, because curiosity is contagious, I would suggest having your if you're doing this for your personal perspective, is have your spouse take it as well, or your partner. And you can see each layer, the differences between how you approach curiosity. And there are 4 factors that make up this assessment. And most likely you're going to differ in terms of how you score on those 4 factors. And then you can talk about that. I recently did a Women in President organization. I did a workshop for them, and there are like 10 CEO women in this group in Nashville. And so they took the assessment. We did the workshop. They had the assessment, and so they had their individual scores, and then they had their team scores. So all the women in the room had their scores. And what was fascinating is all of them asked if their partners or spouses could take it as well.
Oh, interesting.
It wasn't, can my organization take this, which the answer is yes. But they go, I want to better understand my partner. And then, once they understood the factors, they're like, oh my gosh, he is always in focused engagement and I'm in explore and let's get it done. And like, Sarah, understand, first off, having language where you can say, okay, this is where they differ. And now how do we have language around that so we can better relate to one another?
Awesome. I would love that. I don't have a partner presently, but my adult children, I may encourage them to participate in this with me. I also love the idea of having your team do that, because then you can begin to not only role model, listen, I'm investing in this process. I'm curious about how this can show up and how it can create a dynamic. They can then participate in it, and you start to create that contagious culture of let's all show up a little more curious and see how that changes the team dynamic, how we become more innovative, more creative, more solution oriented.
Yeah. And so the real success that I've had with this instrument is I have the individuals take it and I have their teams take it. And I don't share individual assessments, but if people want to share it, that's fine. But we come together and I share, here's what the team looks like, right? And so and then I'll show them the distribution of scores. So you might have someone really high here, you've got someone very low here. And so I talk about where you might have friction. You might have friction, right? And so then we go into, if you have the language around knowing where they're coming from, then you have an opportunity to declare that in a way. So if you're working with someone that now has gone through the workshop with us, and you come at you something and you say, look, I want to go into explore mode for like 10 minutes. I just want to riff on ideas. And so that person that is uncomfortable with that will say, oh, I know where they're coming from. Right. It's one is, how do you build team dynamics by having this information? And then what we do is the team writes a plan in terms of how they want to show up differently as a team. So they walk away with a charter or a plan in terms of how they will act and then how they'll hold each other accountable for being more curious to their plan. So they're the creators of their plan, and then they hold each other accountable for it.
That is brilliant. I love the way that brings them together. Their fingerprints are on it. They're creating sort of this idea and expectation of where they want to go. Can you briefly describe the 4 factors?
Yeah, so the 4 factors, the first one is exploration. And exploration is you're working with someone that is in the explore mode when they're saying, I wonder about this. Hey, have we ever thought about that? So they're like way out there, a little like with a magnifying glass going through the forest, and just like they're just out there in terms of new possibilities. Then the other one is openness to new ideas. So this one would be someone that is saying, well, tell me more about that. Well, that sounds really interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. And then the next one is focused engagement. And so these are people that get the idea and quickly move to solution. Meaning like, all right, I got it, now I'm going to move. I got it, and I got to move. And we need people in organizations that do that, right? So you're working with someone that's in that mode if they say, okay, what's the action plan? Let's put a spreadsheet together. Let's put a RACI together. And then the last one is inspirational creativity. And these are people that have the ability to draw connections. You're working with someone like that if they'll say, you know what? I was reading in People magazine, and then I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and I see these connections, right? So they're bringing in disparate information to come up with a new idea. And we all have parts of those, right? And all of them are on a continuum. So you do get a general score, but the real beauty is that you get to see each of those factors and understand, oh, wow, if I want to be more in explore, this is what it might look like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then do you find that people tend to have a sort of a leading way they show up in terms of their curiosity? In other words, do most people sort of, most often I'm an explorer and I could learn to build up these other things, or most often I'm focused on engagement, want to get right to action planning, and there are times where I could benefit from being more open to new ideas?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. What I have found is that people are generally they either score high on most of them or they score low on most of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, because curiosity can be learned, you can continuously adjust on that. But I had an individual, and I don't know who they are because I only get the clean data, so I don't know the person's name, but they actually scored like a 0 on something. And the organizers of this event came back to me before we actually went to the group, and they said, "Is there a mistake on this?" I go, let me go back into it. And I said, no, they actually scored a 0 on this. It's not a mistake. And
Right.
I had never seen that. And of course, they were just like, hey, let's check the data. And then I have people that score 100 on things.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the score, the scale is 0 to 100. The most important thing is knowing where you're at and areas that you would like to get better at in terms of curiosity. And the reason we want to be more curious is because we're going to have greater performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Greater engagement, greater retention. I assume greater customer experience, right? When you have people that show up that are engaged and want to stick around, they deliver great customer experiences. So it just has this perpetuating opportunity to be positive in terms of performance. So I want to just, for the person listening, I want to double back on a couple things. I love this notion of start with mindset. So the idea that I'm interested, I want to be more curious, I see the benefits of curiosity, the assessment that's available on your website that's free, only takes a few minutes to do, figure out what the levels is among these 4 factors, and then share with others around you that you trust that this is something that you are intentional around. I even love the idea of within the 4 factors, if you find that you're scoring particularly high in one area over and above the others, but you could benefit from being more inspirational and creative or open to new ideas, you can get really intentional, I would think, about those specific areas of curiosity. Like, I'm working on being more open and not going straight to action planning. Here's how I'm doing that. Help check me on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
This is so fantastic. I love everything about all of this. You have leadership courses, you keynote speak, you work with C-suite executives and changing cultures of organizations, have workshops, and your website. Tell the person listening where they can get a hold of you for any and all of these amazing resources that you provide.
Yeah, you just go to my website, which is www.debraclary.com, and everything you need is right there.
Awesome. And your book is, the publication date for your book is October
7th by Fast Company Press.
Awesome. October 7th by Fast Company Press, but it's available on pre-order today.
Yes.
On Amazon.
Yes.
And is that the best place for them to pick up their pre-order copy?
Yes.
All right. So I want to encourage you to be curious and to lean in to this idea. I think that as individuals, we can all learn to be more curious. If we had a world where we were all more curious and asked greater questions and sought to really understand rather than jumping to conclusions, imagine the world that we could create. And for the woman listening that is hesitant, that has been generally conditioned to keep her head down, work hard, make sure she has all the answers before speaking up, your invitation to that individual would be what?
Just take the risk. Take the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in most cases, there's very little downside to taking the risk and asking the questions and learning more. As we close, I like to close all my podcasts with one thing that you would invite the person listening to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. So give us your best advice.
I would stop asking closed-ended questions, those that are either a yes or no. I would start doing is, moving into that space of openness to new ideas. And then what I would continue doing is, continue being a learner. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you are a learner.
Absolutely. Yes, and one of my favorite things, right? That growth mindedness, which you also talk about the relationship between growth mindedness and curiosity and how it continues to feed that learner in all of us. So, Debra, thank you so much for your time with us and helping us to all lean in and be a little more curious. I know that you have inspired me. I'm going to continue reading your book, and I'm going to take the assessment later today as well, so I can figure out where I need to continue to develop. That concludes this edition of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel with me, your host and coach, Dr. Cynthia. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time today investing in yourself. Congratulations for doing that. And thank you for sharing a bit of your time with me. I really know how precious that is, and I'm grateful that we had this time together. If this resonated with you, I invite you to rate or comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and take the next step. Pick up a copy of The Curiosity Curve on Amazon while it's available in pre-sale. You'll have it in your hands in only a few weeks later. Grab a copy of Now Near Next, also available on Amazon. And Human Capital Investment Strategy is available for pre-sale on Amazon as well. Let's stay connected. You can reach me at hello@CynthiaBentzen-Mercer.com or www.CynthiaBentzen-Mercer.com. And in the meantime, remember to boldly start working on your future today.